Alalam, oh, alalam, od yishama, beyare Yehuda, ayu uvechutzot Yerushalayim. Od yishama beyare Yehuda, hayu bechutzot Yerushalayim. Kol zazon v'kol simcha, kol chatan v'kol kala, aylalam. Oh, aylalam, oh, aylalam, aylalam. Oh, thank you so much. You know, you people get to spend all day in the Beit Midrash, so therefore you like the holiness is just like oozing out of you. But I don't spend the whole day in the Beit Midrash. I have to sing a nigun to try to get close to the holy place where you are. Okay, these are the sheets, but I've got my own notes, so I'm going to get my notes to supplement the sheets. Oh, this is so good. Okay. Should we go? I'm ready to go. Oh, Mitsuyan. Okay, sweet. Oh, thank you so much. Shkoyach, thank you very, very much. I know, Nasa V'nishma. Thank you, I'm just going to have one now. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. Amen. Thank you so much. Okay, are we starting? We're on. Oh, I hope you said Amen too. Okay, I have to give a little preface to what I want to talk about today. I find, personally, Tisha B'Av is an incredibly difficult day for me. In fact, I suppose it's not a surprise for all of us. It is really the worst day of the year. I dread Tisha B'Av. We're now after Rosh Chodesh Av. I'm really very much not looking forward to Tisha B'Av. I find it... Right, exactly. It's a really very difficult day to navigate. Ma? Oh, Amen. Exactly. Now, exactly what I wanted to say. I don't know what's going to happen this year on Tisha B'Av. I know what happened last year and the year before, but Be'ezrat Hashem, this year will be different. But there's one thing that I know for sure, and that is the Shabbat after Tisha B'Av will be Shabbat Nachamu. The Shabbat after Tisha B'Av will be Shabbat Nachamu, but really very little will have changed. Possibly, certainly last year that was the case. Last year we had Tisha B'Av, and then immediately after Tisha B'Av, when nothing was rebuilt between Tisha B'Av and the Shabbat immediately afterwards, and yet we had Shabbat Nachamu. So I want to share with you, really, that comes from a desire in myself to process Tisha B'Av. I want to look about the hope within pain on Tisha B'Av, and I want to look at the topic of hope within pain on Tisha B'Av in three areas. Now, I've prepared a source material on this. The source material is only on the first of the three ideas, just because you just can't print that. I felt too bad for the trees, so I didn't print out the second two, but we'll look at the first one inside the sources, and the second two I have over here, and we'll share with them with you. Okay, it's really a theme that goes through all three of them. The first topic that we're going to look at is actually not specifically relating to Tisha B'Av. But it's talking about processing pain, processing a difficult time, the power of hope. Okay. I want to go to the blessing. It's the third source on the page over here. The blessing that Yaakov Avinu gave to his son Yosef at the end of Yaakov Avinu's life. As you know, at the end of his life, we read this in Parashat Vayechi, the end of the book of Bereshit. Yaakov Avinu blesses his 12 sons. He gives a blessing to each of his 12 sons, but before he gives the blessing to each of his 12 sons, he gives a blessing particularly to Yosef. And the blessing that he gives to Yosef is part of the tefillah that we say every single day. We say it as part of our Kriyat Shema Lamita. We say it before we go to bed at night. I'm going to read the psukim. Oh, that's also good. We do say that as well. But, bingo. Thank you. I would love to, but I'm going to continue. So look at this. The pasuk says like this: Vayivarech et Yosef. Yaakov blessed Yosef. Vayomar, and he said to Yosef, Ha'elokim asher hithalchu avotai lefanav, Avraham v'Yitzchak. Ha'elokim, haroeh oti me'odi v'ad hayom hazeh. So he's talking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who was with Avram and Yitzchak and continues to be with me, says Yaakov, and this is a blessing. Hamalach hagoeloti mikol ra yivarech et hana'arim v'karev ahem shemi v'shem avotai Avraham Yitzchak v'yidgu la'rov b'kerev ha'aretz. Hamalach hagoel oti, the angel that saved me from evil, he should bless the Ne'arim. Who are the Ne'arim? His sons, Nachon, Ephraim, and Menashe. Exactly. V'kareh b'hem shemi v'shem avotai Avraham Yitzchak. They should, follow in my path and path of Avraham Yitzchak. V'yidgu la'rov b'kerev haaretz, and they should multiply. We are a living proof of the fulfillment of that bracha. Okay, I want to learn a very, very powerful idea that I learned on this particular parasha. I learned it from a book called The Eish Kodesh. Have you heard of The Eish Kodesh here? I really hope you have. But if you haven't, I'm so happy you're going to find out about it now. Eish Kodesh is a very, very important book. It was written by the Admor of Piazetzna. He was a Piazetzna Rabbi before the Second World War. And then in Poland. And then at the beginning of the Second World War, he, together with his students, they were, and a family, I guess, as well, they were all sent to the Warsaw Ghetto. And he was there for maybe 2 or 3 years in the ghetto. And you can imagine the ghetto was, every week more people were coming in. Unfortunately, every week more people were leaving this world. And it's an incredible thing. As well as being a very inspiring person before the Shoah, he became almost like the rabbi, or the inspiration, the person that really allowed the people living in that living hell that was Warsaw Ghetto, gave them hope. And every week he would give a drasha on Shabbat, and then he would write up these drashot after Shabbat. Eish Kodesh is the book of these drashot that he gave. There's a terrible story about his writings. I think he hid in the ghetto in these, like they had these big tins. I don't know what was in the tins beforehand. He wasn't sure if he would survive the war. In fact, he didn't survive the war. He buried 4 containers containing his writings in different places in the camp. And I think until today, one of the containers, after the war, they discovered, and the writings they were, just maybe it wasn't sealed well, I don't know what happened, and they were unreadable. This is one of the containers, and I think there's still 2 containers that haven't yet been found of his writings. But this book, the Eish Kodesh, that we're going to look at in a minute, if you ever buy a copy of the Eish Kodesh, there's a letter that he writes at the beginning. I suppose that it was a manuscript, but the publisher, with his handwriting, published the letter at the beginning of the book, and it's such a painful read, saying, I don't know if I'm going to make it. I don't know if anyone's going to make it. I don't know what's going to be with the Jewish people after the war. If I make it, then please send this, and he gives my address. But if I don't, if there's no, his name was Rav Cohn Kalman, if there's no, if I'm not around afterwards, so then send it to Yerushalayim. And it was sent to Yerushalayim, and they transcribed and they printed it, and the Eish Kodesh. Recently, just in brackets, I know this is like a tangent on a tangent, but recently there's an amazing academic work that somebody did in America, and each week when he gave a drasha, it was normally responding to something that had happened that week, right? So this historian went through, the archives of the Warsaw Ghetto to see what event he was responding to each week. Now, the copy that I have, I don't know, I haven't seen it, so I don't know what event he's responding to when we read this. But when you read the drasha in the context of what happened that week, it makes it a much more powerful document. It's an amazing, very, very powerful thing to read. Okay. So with that introduction, the Eish Kodesh asks a question. You really have to imagine yourselves. We have to imagine ourselves sitting there, in Mamash. You don't know what's going to be. Sitting there in the ghetto, Shabbos afternoon, and listening to the Rebbe of Cohn Kalman speaking. Okay, he asks a question. If we have a look at the blessing that Yaakov gives to his son Yosef, do you see in Pasuk Tet Vav it says, Vayivarech et Yosef, that Yaakov blessed Yosef. But if you read in the next Pasuk, we read that the blessing that Yaakov gives isn't to Yosef, but it's to Yosef's sons. Hamalach HaGoel Elotim Mikor Yivarech et HaNa'arim. But if you read this text, there's no blessing for Yosef. It's we have a Yosef here in the room.
Blessing him through his sons.
Oh, exactly.
Well, his four sons get divided to two Shvatim also.
Yes, that's true. Also true. He says that maybe you can corroborate this. There's no greater nachat for a parent than for your child to be blessed. So the blessing of Yaakov was that his sons received a blessing. You follow? Okay, that's the Eish Kodesh, part 1. And let me just read that inside. Birkat hapanim u birkat ha'av. But then he takes it a bit further. Birkat Yisrael hu birkat HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If we are the children of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so then when we do well, when Am Yisrael are strong, when Am Yisrael are doing what we need to do, that is the greatest nachat ruach for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the greatest blessing for a parent is to see their child doing well. Like the child listader. Okay, ulehefech, and then this is where he really takes it to a very clever place. The same is true on the other side. Kisheniftar Yaakov Avinu v'Yisrael nitnu b'tzara, gam haTorah nistama, v'gam ba na'aseh b'gam, v'zeo tikvatenu, im tzarotenu megiot kol kach lemala, v'gam ba'marom pagam betach Hashem yoshienu. Do you see what he says? He says, when Yaakov Avinu died and Am Yisrael went into slavery, Yaakov Avinu, the Torah tells us that Yaakov wanted. Maybe I'll backtrack and explain what he's saying. I'll just contextualize what he's saying. It's absolutely brilliant. The first part we understand. The greatest nachat for a parent is when the child is doing well. So the flip side is also true. The greatest pain for a parent is when a child isn't doing well. I remember my wife and I, we once did a parenting workshop, and the teacher said to us, parents are always as happy as their unhappiest child. Because I'm if my child's in pain, so then I can't not be in pain myself. You hear that? Okay. So now he explains that if you read the Psukim, that same concept is in this week's parasha. Yaakov Avinu understood that the Jewish people were about to enter Galut. Nachon? You remember he was about to reveal to the Jewish people the time that Messiah is going to come. Rashi tells us that. Do you remember this? He was going to tell them, but there's no gap between the end of Parashat Vayigash and the beginning of Parashat Vayechi. Is this clear to people? You know, in the Torah, there are gaps at the this week's Parashat when we start Sefer Devarim. There are 3 lines.
There's no gap.
No, but it's not at the end of a line, but it's in the middle of a line. It's the end of a parasha. The only sedra that starts in the middle of a parasha is Vayechi. Like in the middle of a paragraph. Why? Rashi explains Nistamu Einayim v'libam shel Yisrael. Their eye they couldn't see. Yaakov Vinu wanted. That's one interpretation. The other is that Yaakov wanted to reveal, but he couldn't. What blocked Yaakov Vinu from clarity? The fact that his children were going to be in pain. Like when my children are going to be in pain, I can't think clearly anymore. You hear that? So now, the Ish Kodesh says, Zeu tikvatenu. This is our hope, us sitting here now in this ghetto. And this is really a comfort for us, that the greatest pain for HaKadosh Baruch Hu is to see us in pain. And when will the galut end? When will it be the end? When we're screaming out so hard that it's hurting him so much, Kivyachol HaKadosh Baruch Hu will have to say, die. We have to stop now. It's getting too much. Atem shomim et zeh? So every tear, every moment, every challenge, it's not for nothing. The pain that we experience. When I suffer for nothing, that's the greatest pain. But if I understand that I'm not alone, that my pain is part of the Jewish people's tears, and then when, the greatest pain is not what I'm experiencing, is what our Father in heaven is experiencing. And when that pain becomes so much, that'll be the time of the Geula. He was talking in the Warsaw Ghetto about the pain every single day. Luckily, we know, in a different world, we know that straight after Tisha B'Av, we're going to come to Shabbat Nachamu. I know the end. I know that that we're going to get up. We're going to sit on the floor, and then we're going to get up again. But that when we're sitting down on the floor, that pain, we're only a reflection of the greater pain, which is the experience that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is feeling. And that gives it meaning. Atem shomim et zeh? Okay. So that's the first point I wanted to share based on the Eish Kodesh, but I wanted to show practical ramifications of it. Well, I wanted to show you 2 things. One second, where is it? There's a little piece here. The truth is, you can read it later, if that's okay with you. First of all, there's a story here by Rabbi Shlomo Karlebach called The Holy Hunchback. The story, The Holy Hunchback, is a story about a person who is a Talmud of the Eish Kodesh. So read it afterwards, because then this is talking about the Eish Kodesh before he went into before he was in the Warsaw Ghetto. But it's a story about one of his students, and it's a very, very powerful story. But because I don't want to focus on the Eish Kodesh, I want to get to these other Tisha B'Av points. We're not going to read the story now, but I strongly recommend you read. It's also on YouTube. You can listen to the story of the Holy Hunchback, who was the student of Rav Koilem Kalman, whose book, the Eish Kodesh, we just learned. Okay, I want to teach you 2 more things on this topic of pain and hope and stuff like that. Okay. Natan Sharansky. Does everyone here know who Natan Sharansky is?
No.
Okay, Natan Sharansky. When I was a little boy, everybody was talking about Natan Sharansky, because Natan Sharansky was a Jew who was sent into solitary confinement in the Soviet jail for 9 years.
Oh, is this the
because
one
he
where
wanted
one
to
of the
make
rabbis
Aliyah.
called him up before he was sent to jail and said that we're going to try to get you out and everything, and because of that call, he had faith in stayed religious and didn't let go?
So I don't know that story, but I will tell you that he is a hero of the Jewish people, that he lives in our neighborhood, and you feel like an aura when he walks down to the Makolet to buy a bottle of milk. It's hard for us to imagine. 9 years, 9 years. 9 years, if you think where you were 9 years ago and where you are now, you begin to appreciate what the word 9 years means. It's hard to imagine that. Anyway, he tells a very, very powerful story about his time in jail. His wife, he was sent to jail the day after his marriage, and his wife managed somehow to give him a Sefer Tehillim, a book of Psalms. And he's obviously an incredibly bright person, and he taught himself Hebrew by looking at this book of Psalms. And he was reading, and he got to this pasuk, which is not a million miles away from what we saw in the Eish Kodesh a few minutes ago. And this pasuk really gave him strength when he was going through this difficult period. The pasuk is Gam ki elech. Excellent. Even when I walk in the shadow of the...
That's in Michal David, that's the 23rd one.
Excellent. You are such a superstar. Even when I walk in the shadow of the angel of death, I will not fear, because I know that you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, are with me. That was such an amazing revelation for him to discover. Sometimes the greatest pain is when we think we are alone. And just him understanding I'm not alone was a very, very powerful experience for him, Natan Sharansky, to understand. Same idea as when the greatest blessing is for a child, the greatest blessing for a parent is nachat for the child. The greatest pain for a parent is when the child is in pain. And knowing that Abba is in pain, looking at me, really gives me a lot of strength. Does that make sense to you? How does that work? I want to share with you one more pasuk, and with this we will end part 1. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. On the first page, at the last verse, there is a pasuk from Hallel, which we said today. Thank you so much. He'arim rakadu cha'ilim gavaot kivnei tzon. So the mountains will be dancing. He'arim rakadu gavaot, and the little hills kivnei tzon. Why are the mountains dancing? So Shlomo Karlebach told this very, very powerful story. He said that once, imagine, he spoke about the Jewish people, and when things are difficult for the Jewish people, they're in the valley, right? And sometimes you have a Jewish community who is in the valley, and then you have another Jewish community somewhere else in the world, and they're doing well, so they're on the mountains. So you have a community in the valley, they're mamash in pain, and then you have a people on the mountain, and they're doing okay. The people
in the Shawan, you see all the settlements are in the mountains.
Ah, that's interesting. Yeah, so we're not talking about physically a mountain, but we're talking about people doing well. You know, the communities, we all know. I mean, there are certain communities that are affluent, they're doing great. And the other Jewish communities, they're mamash suffering, they're really struggling. Okay, so you have the people in the valley, and the people in the valley are crying. They're crying because they're in pain. But because they're in the valley and they're crying, so then they're crying, it can be heard in the mountains. So the Jews in the mountains are there, and they can hear the cries of the people in the valley. So what happens when I hear a Jew's in pain? So I feel the pain. So the Jews in the mountain start to cry. But then when the Jews in the mountain start to cry because they hear the pain in the valley, so the tears from the crying in the mountains goes down into the valleys. And then the Jews in the valley see that they're not alone. So then when the Jews in the valley see that they're not alone, they start dancing. And then when they start dancing, so then the people in the mountain start dancing too. And that's over here. But it's the process, the idea is that the most painful aspect of suffering is when I suffer alone. When people don't understand me, when I'm going through something difficult and there's no one to talk to. When I'm alone, that's the greatest pain. But understanding that when I'm there, Gam ki elech begeit mavet lo irara ki ata imadi, 9.5 years, but I know that you're with me. Am Yisrael over here in the Warsaw ghetto, Nachon, they understood that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with them. They're understanding that my pain is not suffering that I'm experiencing alone, but I'm experiencing as part of the, we're not alone. Hey Harim, the mountains are dancing because they saw me dancing, because they saw my tears, the whole process that we discussed. So that allows us to get up. That allows us to get up. It's a very, very powerful interpretation of how immediately after Tisha B'Av, we can go to Shabbat Nachamu. How can I get up? How can I get up? And I get up because if I sat down on the floor by myself and there's no one else crying, so that's painful. It doesn't solve the problem, but if I see that the floor is full of people sitting on the floor crying, so then I understand that I'm not alone in my pain. And that I understand I'm not alone, that itself is a comfort. Okay, that is point number one. Point number one of our comfort for Tisha B'Av. Any questions, any comments? Joy, happiness? Does it make sense to everyone? Oh, there has to be a question there one. Livery, you should be well. Comments, thoughts?
I think it's very...
Oh, because I can have a drink. Yes, go on.
No, yeah. I think like the whole, I guess, I don't know, like the word is like the whole essence of being Jewish and Yisrael is hope. Like through all the years in Galut, all all the troubles we've gone through, all the Shoah, all the pogroms and everything. Even now, in Israel, while still terrorist attacks, we always have hope. And against all odds, the Jewish people have survived throughout all the years. And I just think it's the hope we have. And even until this day, we're hoping for the Mikdash. We're hoping for the Gula Shlema. It just shows how Jews we never give up no matter what. Amazing all through all us we're very lucky. We live in a time where it's all pretty easy to us. We were in Eretz Yisrael. We have food, water, bekef. There's Jews who lived in the Galut who lived in a small little shack. No food, no water, and they had hope. And they always had hope of coming back to Yerushalayim.
That's amazing. Amazing.
It shows as Jews we never give up. We're always there.
Yeah, excellent. Absolutely excellent. I think it's very, very true. Rabbi Sachs talks about that. The anthem of the Jewish people is, anthem of the Medinat Yisrael is. Exactly. Thank you, Ovadia. Okay, that was point number one. I want to move on to point number two. Point number two is also another point about hope for Tisha B'Av, but it comes from a different angle. This one is specifically talking about Tisha B'Av, as opposed to the first idea that was talking about pain in general and how understanding that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with me in the pain is the comfort. Here, there's something else. I want to share with you a very, very interesting piece of Gemara. This is Gemara in Megillah. It's not on the sheets. I just felt too bad for the trees. But you should read, I put the whole of this Holy Hunchback story in there, in the hope that you'll read it in your free time to understand who Rav Cohn Kalman was, the Eish Kodesh. The story is amazing. Okay, now, the Gemara tells us like this: Omer Rabbi El Azar, Omer Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Natan Netiyah B'Purim Uvikesh La'akor Tisha B'Av. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. We were speaking about him today. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Listen what he wanted to do. Bikesh La'akor Tisha B'Av. He wanted to get rid of Tisha B'Av. V'lo hodu lo, but the rabbis did not agree with him. I'm not reading from some, a dodgy text. This is from the Gemara in Megillah, Daf Hey. Okay, how could it possibly be that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wanted to get rid of Tisha B'Av? Amar lefanav, Rabbi Abba bar Zavda, Rabbi lo kachayamase. No, that's not what happened. Meaning the recollection of Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Chanina, who were explaining what Rabbi did. You follow? Meaning your report of what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wanted is inaccurate. It's not that he wanted to uproot Tisha B'Av. What did he want to do? Ella, Tisha B'Av shechal liyot b'Shabbat. Tisha B'Av fell on Shabbat. And then, once it falls on Shabbat, we know, you push it off Shabbat. V'tachinu la'achar Shabbat. We pushed it off. Rabbi said, Hoil v'nitcha, once you've pushed it, just push it all the way, and we just won't have it at all. So it's not that we won't have Tisha B'Av at all, but there's no point. If you got Shabbat, there's no need for a Tisha B'Av that year. Does that make sense? That's what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was saying. Okay, there are lots of ways. It's a very interesting concept that Rabbi wanted to not do Tisha B'Av on a year that Tisha B'Av falls on Shabbat.
I mean, it would make more sense to have Tisha B'Av and Yud B'Av. The walls started burning.
Well, that's a separate question. That's a separate question.
And to have it on Yud B'Av, like there it really got destroyed.
Right. Yeah, Machon. Yeah, you're quite right. There was this. I was reading a report. You don't know how accurate these reports are. But last year on Tisha B'Av, I was reading Josephus. I was reading a book that quoted Josephus, and it's crazy how, in general, the Romans were into preserving ancient civilizations. So the decision to destroy the Beit HaMikdash was out of character for a Roman conquest. They wouldn't have expected that to happen. There was a soldier that threw this torch, over from the Kodesh to the Kodesh HaKodeshim. I don't know exactly where he threw it, and it caught light on the parochet, and then that was it. That's what started. But it wasn't an order. It wasn't an order from the general. It was a soldier acting alone, and that happened at the end of the 9th of Av.
Yeah,
exactly.
In the afternoon, where we already stand up.
Right, exactly.
To learn Torah.
Yeah.
So, I heard that, as you said, Titus didn't order it, and I also heard that Titus even ordered to not destroy the Beit HaMikdash at all in the first place.
Ah, that's interesting. Yeah. There are lots of debates about how we read Josephus, but that's not part of our discussion.
He's accurate, but biased.
Right, exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
His views, but his records are...
Right, yeah, the description of the events are probably... Right, Nachon. Okay, so the question, not the question, well, the suggestion by Rabbi is very unusual, that we should get rid of Tisha B'Av. So 2 interpretations. I like both of them, because they both help me cope with Tisha B'Av. One of them is that, as we know, the 39 melachot of Shabbat, we stop building when it comes to Shabbat. However important the Mishkan is, however important the Beit HaMikdash is, Shabbat is even more important. Isn't that amazing? It just gives us a little inkling of how holy Shabbat is. And therefore, I don't mourn when I've got Shabbat. I don't know, like Lahavdil 1,000 times. This is an awful analogy, I apologize. But I don't even know what iPhone number they're up to now. But let's say I break my iPhone 4, but I already own an iPhone 7, so it's okay, Nishkafet, it's not. I've got an iPhone 7 that's working. Are they up to? I don't even know what they're up to.
14.
Are you serious? Okay. Whoops. Okay. But you understand the idea? So Shabbat is just Me'en Olam Haba. That's Shabbat. It allows us a little bit to understand the power of Shabbat. It's not something against the Beit HaMikdash, but it allows us to understand if I'm in Gan Eden experiencing Shabbat Kodesh, so then I'm not going to be mourning about the Beit HaMikdash. Shabbat Chazon is such an important Shabbat for us to be able to do that. I bless us all to manage to do that. Okay, that's one interpretation. Another, this is a very, very, very powerful interpretation. I love it. It's absolutely beautiful. I'm going to learn something with you from the Shem Mishmuel. Does anyone remember who the Shem Mishmuel is? Do you know who that is? Rav Shmuel Bornstein of Sokochov. What he's going to teach us today will, I would say, quite literally blow you away. But it won't literally blow you away. But you will be blown away in every sense other than physically, because he's absolutely amazing. Okay, he explains. I have to say, since I learned the Shem Shmuel, this particular teaching, I have my appreciation of Tisha B'Av changed totally. Okay, he explains like this. It gives an introduction into the Jewish year. What is an anniversary? When I have an anniversary, let's say a birthday, or a wedding anniversary, or Sukkot, Pesach, Purim. So an anniversary is, if you imagine the world as a cycle, a cycle. So then when I come back to the same day when that great thing happened, so I can tap into the energy
Why are we having an anniversary of
that day.
The Beit HaMikdash was destroyed then?
Oh, coming to that. But you're just too quick, because I just want to explain how brilliant the question is. If we're going through, an anniversary is always to tap into the energy. That's why I'm so excited on Lela Seder, because it's not just that they went out of Egypt. Like the Rambam says, it's not like we have to believe that I'm coming out of my Egypt right now, because I'm tapping into the energy of that phenomenal night. And so too every single Chag. Every Chag, I'm tapping into the energy of that Chag. However, what about a bad day like a Tzom? So what am I tapping into on Tisha B'Av? He strengthens the question. He quotes a pasuk from Nachum. I don't think I would have found this pasuk were it not for the Shem Shmuel, but the Nachum in Perek Aleph, pasuk Tes, says like this: Ma tachashvun el Hashem kala hu oseh v'lo takum pa'amayim tzara. Lo takum pa'amayim tzara. Bad things don't happen twice. Lo takum pa'amayim tzara, meaning there isn't. It's not like I commemorate the anniversary of a tragedy so I can tap into the energy of the tragedy. What am I doing on Tisha B'Av? I understand my purpose on Pesach, on Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippurim. These are awesome days, and I'm tapping into the holiness of that, because the cycle, I'm coming back to that moment again. But Lo Takum Pa'amayim Tzara means that terrible things don't happen twice. Nachon? So what am I tapping into on Tisha B'Av? Okay. Oh, I'm so excited for you.
So,
Wait, didn't though on Tisha B'Av the second time?
I know you're not helping here. You're not really helping.
You just said the same thing doesn't happen twice, but it did on Tisha B'Av.
I know. So I want to phrase the question again. You're right. There is mazal. Mazal is something else. As we know, the month of Av is a time that we don't take too many chances. Just for you to know, you're not supposed to hit your kids during the month of Av. Now, yeah, excellent. Yeah, chas v'shalom.
you're not supposed to hit your kids in the month of Av?
Yeah, in fact, I nowadays I would not recommend it at all. It's really not the way to go. Talking is great now. Nowadays, talking is a good option.
Why are you not allowed to hit your kids?
But you don't want to hit them too hard. But maybe that's not a good example. Maybe we'll go for swimming. We don't go swimming during the 9 days. Even if you are an Olympic swimmer, you're still swimming. It's not, not the safest.
I thought that's more for the bathing, for pleasure.
No, it's about the day, like airplanes as well.
Right. Yeah.
All the same idea. So there's something about there's different times of year but I'm not commemorating it. I'm being cautious on, when I come into a bit like you walk slowly when it's very dark and I don't know where I'm going. So I walk slowly so I don't trip over.
Can you go to the mikvah?
You can go to the mikvah.
What on Tisha B'Av?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably, I would say you're not supposed to bathe. I would say probably not, but I don't know. But I'm guessing not.
It's exactly a bath, though. You go, you dip,
You
you
don't.
get out.
No, you don't even wash your hands in the morning
You
of.
just do the
Tisha B'Av.
fingertips. That's it.
You don't go to the mikvah. You go after chatzot maybe.
If you go every day, then it's already regilacha. Maybe you have something to rely on.
Yeah, so true. I don't actually know. That is a good question. I've never thought about that before, so I don't know the answer.
Chabad and go every day.
Yeah, that's true. You're right.
They might have something to go on.
Absolutely. Anyway, I want to just distinguish, to go back to our discussion about being cautious, which I think is something we all need to do at certain times. and commemorating something. So my question isn't, I'm acknowledging, we are acknowledging that it's a time that we need to be cautious, that we are chas v'shalom susceptible to terrible things, and indeed,
That's why they say
terrible things have happened on Tisha B'Av, but we are doing more than just being cautious on Tisha B'Av, we are commemorating. So my question isn't, I understand cautious makes sense. History has proven the necessity of being cautious on Tisha B'Av, but what are we commemorating? That's the question. Yeah.
That's why on off they say when you have a court case with a non-Jew,
Oh, exactly.
try not to do it during the 3 weeks or during the month of Av. Try pushing it off.
Excellent. That's a good.
I've also heard
Very good. That is caution. That's not commemoration.
I also heard that if you're going to do a medical treatment or something like that, you should also try pushing that off.
Excellent. Yes, all true. All true. It's all about caution, not commemoration. So what are we commemorating? Okay. Listen to this. This is mamash phenomenal. The Shem Shmuel tells us, you're probably familiar with this, sweet people. You know that in the Gemara it's in Bava Metzia. The Gemara in Bava Metzia tells us, the Gemara in Bava Batra tells us about the cherubs, the kruvim, in the Kodesh HaKodashim, inside the Beit HaMikdash. Now, the Gemara in Bava Batra tells us that if the Jewish people are doing God's will, then the kruvim were pointing one another, facing one another. That's probably better. But if chas v'shalom less, they wouldn't be facing one another. That's something that you're familiar with, right? Okay, now listen to this. That was Gemara in Bava Batra. The Gemara in Yuma tells us about the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash. There was, as you all know, no Aron in the time for the second Beit HaMikdash, but the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, the Greeks came into the first temple. They opened the parocha. They walked into the Kodesh HaKodashim. They saw the kruvim on the Aron Abrit. How do you think they were? Do you think they were like this, or like not? You would assume they were not facing one another. So Gemara in Yuma tells us that they were surprisingly facing one another. Is that amazing? Huh?
Weren't they hugging also? Or is that...
When the Gemara says, I'll tell you, read the Gemara. The Gemara says like this. They were facing one another. So, I mean, that's odd, unusual, right? That's counterintuitive. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. The Shem Shmuel explains something absolutely beautiful. He talks here about, just think about a good word to, it's like the intimacy of retribution. Let me explain what the intimacy of retribution means. If we all go back to our childhoods, and I want to remember, when I was a 5-year-old, it'll be difficult for you because you are a room of tzaddikim, and I'm sure none of you ever did anything wrong. So it'll be difficult for you to imagine this. But for me, actually, it's not that difficult. If you go back to a 5-year-old, and once in a while, my parents or a parent will have to reprimand the child. You know, if a child does something wrong, so you have to say something. And what does a child do when the parents are upset? The child starts to cry. And what do the parents do when the child is crying? The parent hugs the child. That is intimacy of retribution. That is a deep moment of closeness between a parent and a child. But that moment of deep closeness between the parent and the child comes as a result of this retribution. Like parents, sometimes you have to say harsh things to the child, and it's hard for the child to get it, and it can be a very painful moment, but it's also a very intimate moment. You hear that? It explains the Shem Shmuel that the moment of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash was HaKadosh Baruch Hu giving us that hug. Isn't that amazing? That is a moment of deep intimacy. Tisha B'Av, let's say on other days of the year, you might have intimacy as a result of Kedusha on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. The intimacy between, we can just, Amelech Basadeh, we're closer, that you just feel HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the air. There's an intimacy on other Chagim that comes as a result of, whatever the power of that Chag is. Yamim Noraim, or, the Simcha on Sukkot, whatever the intimacy would be on each Chag. The intimacy between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu on Tisha B'Av is the intimacy that comes as a result of that retribution. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving us a sweet, holy hug on Tisha B'Av. A hug because we did something wrong. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu it's going to be fine. I'm going to, you have to fix it, but you're going to be fine. According to the Shem Shmuel, that's what I commemorate on Tisha B'Av. Isn't that brilliant? I'm not commemorating this time that I need to be cautious, that we were saying, because I don't commemorate pain. I don't commemorate pain just for itself or commemorate destruction, because there's no point in commemorating destruction just for the sake of destruction. There's no value in that. There's no future in that. But I'm commemorating on Tisha B'Av the intimacy that I feel with HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the pain. I'm crying. The tears are pouring down our faces. We're embarrassed, but we're close and we're intimate. Isn't that brilliant? That's the Shem Shmuel. Then you explain that on Shabbat we have intimacy. I mean, it's the closest. Shabbat is a moment of deep intimacy with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If the point of Tisha B'Av is a moment of intimacy with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then I can get that on Shabbat. I don't need to have it on Tisha B'Av, because otherwise the suggestion of Rabbi doesn't make any sense at all. I still need to commemorate the destruction of the temple. But if, according to Shem Shmuel, Tisha B'Av is not about commemorating destruction, it's about commemorating intimacy, a unique type of intimacy, an intimacy that comes out of a moment of pain. But I'm commemorating the intimacy. Then you say, well, I've got it. I just had Shabbat intimacy. So if you've got the Shabbat intimacy, I don't need to have the Tisha B'Av intimacy. But the Gemara explains, no, there's value. There's different types of intimacy. There's the intimacy of Shabbat. You'll get that on the 9th of Av, which is on Shabbat. But you still need this other type of intimacy that comes out of pain, and that's why you still have Tisha B'Av. Does that make sense to everybody? That is point number 2. Joy, happiness, questions?
I'm not sure if it's much joy.
Oh, bother. My whole point of today's shiur, in all 3 points, is to try to bring a bit more hope, or a bit more, I don't know what the word is, like less yush into Tisha B'Av. It's not a day of hopelessness.
In your analogy, the hug of the parent was the moment of intimacy, not when they gave when they rebuked the child, right? With the Beit HaMikdash, it was just one action. Like there's no hug. It's just the punishment.
Yeah, you're right. But I suppose I'm taking it as one experience, meaning that they really go hand in hand. Meaning the minute of retribution. Or even sometimes, like, it doesn't need to be a punishment. It's not like the parents hit you and then you start crying. But like, I don't know, when, I don't know, I don't say terrible thing. I failed, or it becomes clear that I lied, or that I didn't stand up to, wasn't unable to, maintain the standards that were expected of me. So it's not then, there would not necessarily have been a conversation prior to the hug. It's not like they shout at me and then I cry. Maybe I should have presented that more clearly. There's sometimes it just when there's a realization that I messed up, and it's out there, and we all know it now, and that I process that pain through a very intimate moment with the parent, and that is the experience of Tisha B'Av. That's his interpretation. Oh my gosh. That is amazing. Comments? You have anything to say, Shushan?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. We'll move on to the third one now. Is that okay? Okay. The third tip for Tisha B'Av is from, it's a Gemara in Ta'anit. Gemara in Ta'anit tells us, it's a phrase that you're probably all familiar with. The Gemara says like this: Kol ha'oseh melacha b'Tisha B'Av eino ve'eino mitapel al Yerushalayim eino ro'eh b'simchata. Anyone who, continues on their daily routine on Tisha B'Av and is not mourning about Jerusalem will not merit to see the joy of the city. Shnei Amar, as the verse says, Simchu et Yisrael v'gilu ba kol ohaveha, sisu ota masos kol hamitaplim alea. Huh? No, it's not there. Anyone, the people that will rejoice in Yerushalayim are the v'gilu ba kol ohaveha v'sisu ota masos kol hamitaplim alea. Those who mourned will be the ones who will be able to celebrate. Mikan Amru, then the rabbis deduce from this, Kol hamitapel al Yerushalayim. Anyone who mourns for Jerusalem, Zocher v'ro'eh b'simchata, will merit to see its joy. V'she'eno mitapel Yerushalayim, if you don't, eino ro'eh b'simchata, they won't see the joy. Oh, Shalom Aleichem, how are you doing? What a joy to see. You're about to hear something amazing from Rabbi Sachs and the Kedusha Levi. Okay, the Gemara says something very interesting. Kol hamitapel al Yerushalayim, anyone who mourns for Jerusalem, zocher v'ro'eh b'simchata. Anyone here understands some Hebrew? Zochet. What does the word zocher means?
Turning.
Zocher v'ro'eh. Ro'eh is present tense.
Oh, merit and
If you want to say yir'eh, yizkeh v'yir'eh. But it doesn't say yizkeh v'yir'eh, it says zocher v'ro'eh. So the verse, the teaching the rabbis learn is, anyone who mourns for Jerusalem sees its joy. It doesn't say anyone who mourns Jerusalem will see the joy. Anyone who mourns, sees. In other words, this year on Tisha B'Av, even if chas v'shalom, it's like last year's Tisha B'Av, even in that case, we will right now see b'simchata. Isn't that amazing? That's what the Gemara says. So how am I to understand that? Okay, so I want to share with you two interpretations. One of them is Rabbi Sachs, and the second one is a few people say it, but the Maharal and Kedusha Levi. Okay, you know what? I'm going to start with the Maharal. The Maharal says something very, very interesting about the feeling pain for Jerusalem. But I'm going to explain the words of the Maharal with an analogy. Okay, a Golan analogy. You were just in the Golan, right? Yeah. I want you to imagine two boys climbing up a mountain, like you were not that long ago. Climbing up a mountain. One of them is an expert mountaineer. He's got all of his gear. He's really kitted out for this sort of thing. And the other one less so. So the first guy, it's a 3-hour hike to the top of the mountain. So easy to say it. It's much harder to do it. Okay, the first guy is up. It takes him 2 hours. 2 hours, he gets to the top. And he's, nowadays, Baruch Hashem, there's lots of ways you can entertain yourselves for an hour until the rest of the chevra come. So he's sitting on top of the mountain, puts his head, puts his rucksack, and he schloffs for an hour at the top of the mountain. The other guys are climbing up the mountain, sweating and like pushing them with every atom of their body is focused on one goal, and that is to get to the top of the mountain. So the Maharal asks, in a different context, I'm sort of paraphrasing him, but which one of them is at the top of the mountain? In a way, explains the Maharal, the guys climbing up the mountains are far more connected to the top of the mountain than the guy who is already there. Why? Because the guy who's already there, he's lying down, rucksack, schloffing. He could be anywhere in the world. He happens to be on the top of the mountain, but he could wake up in 10 minutes and not realize where he is. And looking for his toothbrush or whatever it is. He happens to be physically at the top of the mountain, but his mamash not there. The guys climbing up the mountain are only thinking about the top of the mountain. That is the only idea in their minds is top of mountain. In a way, the guys climbing up, are far more at the top of the mountain than the guy who is actually at the top of the mountain. You follow? Okay. So explains the Maharal in many, many areas this is relevant, but over here he talks about it. Yerushalayim is only relevant if I keep on thinking about it. You follow? Meaning, if I'm mourning for Yerushalayim, it means Yerushalayim is alive. But if I'm not in pain, if I'm not thinking about it, so then it doesn't exist for me. You follow? It's not to do with where I live. It is not to do with it whether I'm physically at the kotel or if I could be, the other side of the world. It's not about where I'm physically based, but it's what's on my mind. Is Yerushalayim relevant? Am I thinking about it? If I'm thinking about it, it's alive. Atem shomim? It's true of 1,000 different things, but it's true of Yerushalayim too. You follow? So kol mitapel al Yerushalayim, anyone who is mourning for Jerusalem, this is so brilliant. Zochev ro'eh means Jerusalem is alive for them. Jerusalem is so. I'm enjoying Jerusalem because my thoughts about it are keeping it alive. You follow what I'm saying? So this moment within my tear is a joy because our mourning is what keeps Jerusalem alive. So I'm zochev ro'eh this minute b'simchata. You follow what I'm saying? It's not that I'm looking forward to some, we are obviously davening for the future, that we should be blessed to see the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash, b'meira b'yameinu. But our moment of thinking means Yerushalayim is alive. So if Yerushalayim is alive, that's a cause for joy. That's whatever's. Isn't that brilliant?
How can you mourn for Yerushalayim nowadays? Like it's
so that's another question.
Such a moving city, with trains, with cars,
Jerusalem
so
is
many people.
absolutely phenomenal. You're right, but I think there's still, it's hard for us to imagine the world of the Beit HaMikdash because it's so far away from what we have today. But I know that we're not living the ideal Jewish life right now. So we're mourning the fact that we're not living an ideal Jewish life. But you're quite right. My Tisha B'Av today is so different. 100 years ago, our great-grandparents, their Tisha B'Av, it can't compare what they experienced to what we experience. But it's only... So my pain on Tisha B'Av is what keeps Jerusalem alive. It's a bit like this story that may be true, maybe not true, about Napoleon. Do you know about the story about Napoleon? Yes. That's the 19th century. He happened to be in the Middle East in one of his big wars, and he was in Cairo on some campaign, and he walked past a shul in Cairo, and he saw there's all the Jews that were sitting down on the floor, and they were crying. So he asked one of the Jews, "Why are you all sitting on the floor crying?" So the Jews told him, "We're crying because our temple in Jerusalem was destroyed." And Napoleon said, "What are you talking about?" He had every map of the region. He knew exactly what was happening in Syria, in Lebanon, in Egypt, in Israel. He knew everything that was going on in every single place. On no map, no one ever mentioned a temple in Jerusalem. Here they are sitting on the floor crying about it. I didn't even know. What are you talking about? What temple? So they said, no, it's not a temple from this year or last year. It's a temple from 1,800 years ago. To which he then responded, if people can cry for 1,800 years, so then they will merit, to come back. That's exactly this idea. If I'm crying, it means Jerusalem is alive. So if Jerusalem is alive, so then that's what I'm celebrating. Atem shomim? Okay, Rabbi Sachs puts it very nicely. I'm going to read Rabbi Sachs. Okay, he says like this: there is a profound difference. I don't know where he said this. I mean, he said this in a few places, but I didn't write where he said it. I'm sorry about that. There is a profound difference between history and memory. History is his story, an event that happened some time ago to somebody else. Memory is my story, something that happened to me, and it is a part of who I am. History is information. Memory, by contrast, is part of identity. I can study the history of other peoples, cultures, and civilizations. They deepen my knowledge and broaden my horizons, but they do not make a claim on me. They are the past as past. This is brilliant. Memory is the past as present, as it lives on within me. Isn't that brilliant? I have a memory of the Beit HaMikdash because it is past as present, as it lives in me. Without memory, there can be no identity. As with individuals, so too with a nation. A nation has a continuing identity to the extent that it can remember where it came from and who its ancestors were. That is exactly what we're doing on Tisha B'Av. That is our memory. And that is the source of our joy. Our joy on Tisha B'Av is the fact that the memory is still alive. That's the Atem Shomim Mitzvah. Okay. There are a few other people that say the same thing. It also appears in the Sfat Emet. One second. So I'll read to you the Kedusha Levi. Let me conclude then with the words of the Kedusha Levi. Is that okay? One second. Here, this is from the Sfat Emet, sorry. The Sfat Emet says, the Sfat Emet is on Parashat Kitavo. He says like this, V'ata zochin el hasimcha al yedei ha'avelut shel Beit HaMikdash. Sisu b'masos kol ha'mitablim, amru Chazal, ha'mitabel al Yerushalayim zoche v'ro'eh b'nechemat Yerushalayim. Fa'agam שהפירוש הוא על העתיד מכל מקום. גם זה אמת, שעל ידי האבלות זוכה להרגיש שמחה מירושלים. You know, I'll tell you what it is. It sort of links a little bit to what Rabbi Sachs was saying. If you imagine, I mean, all the people that have passed away in our lives. If you have like a grandparent or a great grandparent that passed away many years ago, so I'm in pain that they're no longer with me. But sometimes when I just think back to those memories, so I smile with those memories because the memory brings me back to there. And going back to there itself brings me joy. So zochev ro'eh, meaning it's like a pleasant memory. I'm going back in time and like remembering a grandparent or a great grandparent and the great times that we had together. I smile because it's not a raw pain anymore, but it's a memory, and a memory gives me joy. So zochev ro'eh b'simchata, ani mitabel, I'm mourning about Jerusalem, but that mourning itself triggers the memories, and those memories give me joy. Atem shomim et zeh? Okay, so I want to summarize. We spoke about three things today, 3 points. The first one, the power of hope, we learned from Rav Klonimus Kalman, the Piazetzner Rebbe, about parents and children, about the greatest pain for a parent is the pain of a child, just like the greatest joy for a parent is the joy of a child. And that was the idea that when I'm alone, that's when I feel the greatest pain. But knowing that I'm not alone, Gam ki elech begeitz mavet lo irara ki atat me'adi, I know that you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, are with me in this pain. That itself is my comfort. There is no pain that I will experience alone because I know that you are with me in whatever pain I'm experiencing. That's what we saw from Cohn was Common, powerful for all pain, but powerful particularly on Tisha B'Av. That was the first point. The second point we saw from the Shemesh Shmuel, we spoke about the Kruvim. We spoke about intimacy of retribution. That sometimes in that moment of where I expose myself, where I don't live up to my expectations, and my parents help me process that moment, that is a moment of great intimacy between a parent and a child. I commemorate on Tisha B'Av not the destruction, because that's just there's nothing valuable will come out of that. I'm commemorating the intimacy with HaKadosh Baruch Hu that I feel as a result of that moment. That's point number 2. And then point number 3 was talking about how is it that I mourn Jerusalem and Zochev Ro'eh, right now I feel its joy. I feel its joy right now because if I'm mourning, it means it's still alive. And if it's still alive, that's a reason for joy. And I'm tapping back to that memory, as we saw both in the Baal Sfat Emet and also in Rabbi Sachs, that when my memory is strong, so that my identity is strong. And really that's the nechama of Tisha B'Av. So I want to bless us all with all 3 blessings. On Tisha B'Av, but in general, we should know that we're not alone. You're never alone. Gam ki elech b'keitz hamavet. You're also part of the Machon Meir family, not just, you should all have people you can speak to. You should always know you're not alone. That's number 1. That's the first nechama. The second nechama from the intimacy of that moment, that I experience the intimacy of a difficult time, but I grow through that. And then the third one over here is that if I'm crying, but I'm not, I understand that it keeps Jerusalem alive. That's also a nechama. Our Tisha B'Av, the fact that thousands and thousands of people crowd to Jerusalem, the Kotel Plaza is heaving for over 25 hours. That is the greatest joy, because it means that Avelut is still alive. But as long as Avelut is still alive, then we know it's going to come. It should be this year, Be'ezrat Hashem. Yeshar Koach to all of you. Tizkulu mitzvot.